Welcome to Leaning In, a space for curious conversation and active engagement. I, Tanya Mikvitz,
and I, Jessica Lusty, invite you to lean into life together, exploring what it means to live into transformational practices in our day-to-day lives as we engage in relationships, family dynamics, our conditioning, and the narratives of dominant culture.
How do we actually embody change in our own lives and as a collective? In this fifth episode of Leaning In, we begin to explore how we live through stories, symbols, and archetype. We look at the experience of dreams and also the idea of collective stories and symbols in relationship to our own meaning-making. Both the archetypal understandings and dynamics within a story can be useful to understand our conditioning, our wounding, and how and where we move from in our interactions. In this episode, we explore the drama triangle in addition to dream work, as well as fairy tales and superheroes. The power of archetype and understanding narratives is that it offers us a springboard for reflection of how we view ourselves, how we act in our relationships, and how we move in the world. In this conversation, we explore how shadow work can help us shift the narrative we react from. What stories are alive for us? Which narratives rule us unconsciously? Which story do we wish to choose as we move forwards, and how can we pave the way for that change?
Welcome. Very happy to be here opening our fifth episode of Leaning In. And if you've been with us, you've heard us talking about wanting to use this space to expand the individualistic orientation that many of us have been acculturated in, to situate ourselves more fully within the greater context of the collective, to experience our interconnection, our interdependence in ways that help us be more response-able to how to respond rather than react out of conditioned patterns and the stories that are woven. And that's something that we're going to talk a lot about today. To be more present in the immediacy of the life world and the relationship with all the beings that we are among, and as well as the cosmos and the historical, cultural landscape that is held in the archetypal entities and expressions and dynamics that carry through the stories that we hear every day, the songs that we hear every day, what we are exposed to in the media, and that really shapes so much of our understanding of who we are, how we belong, and the interplay between the present, the past, and the future. And as we're in this space, I think both Tanya and I are wanting to support ourselves and to support those of us who are engaging here to really be able to be more perceptive to what's happening for us on the conscious level, what's running in our subconscious level, and then what the interplay is between what we experience as our own consciousness and the collective consciousness that we are among. And within the context of this kind of landscape of mind, of psyche, of body, of life world, it's almost like there are lines of story that run through, and they hold both personal and collective complexes that are shaped by, and in turn, in their reiteration, in their reification, and the ways that we reassert them in our lives and relationships, they shape the systems. So there's this feedback loop, right? That's always happening. It's happening in us between our past and our future, where our past experiences that shape, the wounds and the conditioning that shape the way we are perceiving and responding, reacting to what's happening. It's shaping our present. And then, there's this feedback loop into this reassertion in the present of what was in the past. And what we really want to do is become adept at breaking some of those cycles, or being more conscious and more creative, more imaginative in the way we engage with those dynamics in ourselves, so that we really can repattern our own lives, reconstruct the systems we've put together for ourselves, right? We all have these frameworks of our own foundations. And in fact, Tanya and I were talking in some of the deep work we were doing together this week. I was sharing how, I was like, oh my gosh, what does it mean to really accept and be in loving, compassionate, creative relationship with the fact that my wounding and my early conditioning really set the structure for the life that I live in today, right? And there are certain things about that structure that I really am working to retrofit and to reshape. And there's this, there's this piece there that's really potent for me and poignant for me in this moment as we're talking about this, because I've really been sitting with some of those structural pieces in my life. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about archetype and how we work with it and how it expresses in various ways in both the maps we use and the ways that we explore different levels of our own consciousness, and the way that we get insight on how what's held in the collective unconscious, the complexes that are really expressions of a genderized hierarchical system, right? That are expressions of a racialized hierarchical system, that are expressions of a class system, that in many parts of the world, has a very deep systemic hold on the way that society functions and is structured. So unpacking some of those things, not all of that today, of course, but just setting the stage for, how this is alive in these conversations and these inquiries that we're carrying in this project. And, it's like I've heard you say, Tanya, to understand what the waters are that we swim in. And we really do swim in these waters that are imbued with these archetypal figures and these archetypal understandings of what it means to be who we are, depending on how we were positioned in society, what kind of body we are in, what age we are, how we're situated within our socio-demographic cultural systems. And I wanted to share this quote that I find really powerful by a scholar named Ryan. Embedded in the collective memory of the human being, archetypes are propagated on a personal and communal level, appearing in the individual psyche as well as on the collective. On the collective level, archetypes evolve to reflect the input of multiple storytellers. And I love this because I feel like it gives us an opportunity to situate ourselves within the position of being the storyteller of our own lives, and how we choose to tell the story, and what aspects of our story are we privileging, and are we really setting at the center, and are we fueling and feeding. And we are, as we just mentioned a little bit of, we are culturally conditioned to identify with particular archetypes. And these archetypes serve a social, political system and purpose, right? So to come into question, right, what are the archetypes that I've been culturally conditioned to give expression to embody. And what does that serve, right? This kind of critical questions that we can ask that can help position us within our own agency to impact the systems and the structures and the storylines that we're in. And, you know, I can say, like, for me, as a young woman positioned in a very hierarchical, genderized system, where the feminine is very much objectified and, you know, positioned as an object available for the male gaze, the male's expression of desire and pleasure and possession. You know, that I grew up in a system where I was deeply impacted by that conditioning, both psychologically and physically, like within the context of the way that I feel and experience my own skin in spaces and places and in relationship. And, you know, so for me, a lot of healing around my sex, a lot of healing around my gender, a lot of healing around my sensual nature has really been, it has involved coming into a deeper understanding of how these archetypes, as they, in my particular community, were very much held and communicated in and enforced within a Christian context. You know, how those live in me, the virgin and the whore, like really exploring some of those things. So I'm just setting that forward as an example of, you know, how archetype is a living expression that has really supported my own liberation in relationship to my being as a sensual, sexual, feminized person within the society that I'm in. And archetypal inquiry can help us come in to understand how we're positioned differently, how we relate to our experience, how our experience and our relationship with ourselves and others is culturally coded. And they often are expressions of values and dynamics, and they are giving expression to justifications for the dominant system. And when an archetype is presented that disrupts the dominant narrative, right, there can be resistance. And there's a lot of examples I think we can get into more later, but that we can think of in our current society, right, where there are these archetypal expressions that don't fit the box, right, of what it means to be human, or what it, you know, how we express our natures that are disruptive to the system. And they meet a lot of resistance, sometimes violent resistance. And how do we be in relationship with that? And even in relationship with the ways that, you know, that I know within myself. I can remember being a young woman in my early 20s and kind of realizing how much I had a very unconscious, knee-jerk, visceral, rejecting, judging, othering reaction to Hillary Clinton. And when I really unpacked that, I was able to see just how much that was an expression of some very bigoted and very sexist and oppressive ideas that I was holding about the place of a woman in the world, you know, and that here I was enforcing, you know, these kinds of cultural complexes around a woman's place in the world, to the detriment of the entire, you know, the entire sex, the entire category of woman. And it was very unconscious. And once I like really unpacked it, it was a powerful moment for me when I really realized the extent to which, you know, I had internalized some of these archetypal proscriptions, right? And prescriptions, the proscriptions of how we're supposed to be, and the prescriptions of what we are not supposed to be, you know, in occupying a certain expression. So, you'll find that we'll be working with these things and weaving them into what we're doing so we can better distinguish and differentiate these different pieces that are at play in what we're creating here. And one of the places and a modality where we do this is with dreams and in dream work, because dreams, and there's a lot of the psychology that archetypal understanding is an expression of, really is deeply rooted in a modality of attending to the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious through dream and exploring dream, because it's all held there, right? Our dreams are these wild landscapes and spaces where things that often scare us and surprise us and entice us. And, the whole spectrum of what can happen in a dream is wide open in comparison to what we typically experience in our day-to-day. And our capacity to explore that landscape can be very revealing in these ways of being able to put on the skin of a different position, to kind of get outside of like what that main central storyline or the main central idea is that we may be centering in our conscious day-to-day, and explore some of the other competing perspectives, perhaps alternative perspectives, tabooed perspectives that will present within the context of our unconscious and within the context of our dreams. And yeah, so I don't know, Tanya, if you have anything to drop in here based on what I've shared so far.
A beautiful description of all of this, and it's so fascinating. I think it's also really fascinating, this idea of like the archetypes and the symbols we share, and then we kind of have our personal ones as well. And I think in dream work that's really interesting, like this idea that you would have like a dream kind of dictionary, and you can go and look a thing up, but I some of it will be true because there is or will resonate, but it won't always, because we move between our own unique understanding and placement of meaning onto something or association, and then we also have the shared experience. I'm curious though whether you've had any dreams lately. I have a feeling you might have had a dream lately that maybe we could
I don't know about others, but I have heard other friends and people in my life, in my household, talking about just like that the dream world has been really active lately. And you could probably share with us a little bit about some archetypal or astrological transits that might be contributing to that, but we'll save that for another time. I had a dream last night that was very visceral and very it was very physical in a way that was really interesting. And I'm definitely carrying some dreams.
Yeah. Would you be willing to sort of go into a little bit of the dream, and we can sort of explore what that can look like?
Yeah, sure.
And how it might feel. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jessica, for being willing to share with us. Dreams are very intimate as well. So if you take a moment and just allow yourself maybe to close your eyes, and if you were to take us with you into your dream and speaking in the present tense to what you're seeing and experiencing, and then I might come in with some suggestions and explorations.
Okay. So I'm in this place that I know and I feel somewhat familiar with, and there's something wrong with me. There's something physically wrong with me. There's these lesions on my face, and there's like a wound in another part of my body. I can't quite bring exactly where up right now, and I'm very I'm very disconcerted about this. And I'm also like carrying this reluctance to, I don't know, there's something that they think I should do in order to deal with this, but I'm like really uncomfortable with that. And then this sort of grandfatherly figure, someone who, I feel a lot, it's like someone who stepped into my life now, who kind of holds that for me, comes in, and with that person, I feel comfortable. It's almost like they're going to do this treatment to me. And so they put this, like, it's so weird. It's like this syringe kind of gets stuck into one part of me, and they pump this stuff into me. And then there's another one, and then that goes in. And I'm like, but then the syringes don't go away. So it's so weird. It's like they're flopping around. And I feel like this is like, they're going to have to do this again to me. And I'm trying to go about, like, I have this sense that there's so much that I want and need to do. And I'm like wanting to fulfill what it is that I'm wanting to need to do. But I'm like kind of, feeling debilitated by this. And it's like, should I rest, but I really feel compelled to do this. And then at one point, I catch my face in the mirror, and I see that like these lesions, or it's like a crazy kind of like bubbly rash on my face is starting to dry up. So there's this sense that this is working. Whatever they've done to me is working. And then I'm carrying forward, and I'm trying to get these other things done. But that was like the main thing.
Okay. So that's very vivid and very strong. So just take a breath and feel into that. And stay with what's happening in your body in this dream. The way the lesions feel on my skin is.
I feel a tightness and a soreness. It's tight, it's sore, it's hot.
Mm-hmm. What I sense this tightness is holding for me is.
It's like this feeling of being restricted, being sort of contained.
Mm. The help I imagine receiving from what is pumped into the syringes into my system is.
Like when it went in, it felt like a deep nourishment. And there's something now that's like, I feel like this sense of being cared for, being resourced. Like it's like there's like, I just felt like when it came in, it was like this deep nourishment. Like I immediately felt that this was something beneficial, even though it was something that I was resisting and I was really uncomfortable with.
Yeah. My resistance to the nourishment I so need is.
Mm. I feel tears when you say that. I mean, just even sitting with that.
Yeah.
I feel
My heart feels
really young, really soft, really tender.
the way I can look after this part of me right now and nourish this part of me right now is.
There's definitely something about, like, what would it mean for me to just really meditate on that archetype of the benevolent, grandfather,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
wise elder masculine, like, the very gentle masculine without any, there's no predatory, there's none of that energy
Mm.
there. It's just a very pure, loving, wise, elder,
Mm.
masculine.
Beautiful. So just let yourself take a few breaths here and come back and just highlighting how deep this work could go if we were in full session together, and how rich really the soil of this dream and this experience in the dream is. So thank you, really honoring that you're willing to share that, because when we do guided work like this as well, we never really know where it might take us, and that's the beauty of it. But also, why it's so profound, and doing it in a space like this can be vulnerable. So really appreciating you, Jessica, for going there. And there was something that is so beautiful as well, because what you spoke about before in terms of like relationship to the archetypes of the feminine, of who you were perceived as in the community that where you grew up, what was given the sense of being the sort of the predatory male, really, and that was sanctioned and that was expected. And then this dream is sort of resourcing you into a different possibility, right? And a different potential and a different truth as well, because all of, it's all there. So it's so fascinating how our dreams can really map what is not just what we're processing, but also when we go into it, sort of guide us towards what we need. And I think that's beautiful. And I said the word map. So as those of you who know me know that I love a map of any kind. And I think I might have said it before on here as well, like, give me all the tools, give me all the maps. And I've, for me, using things like astrology and the tarot and also the archetypal stories all help me to understand myself and my experience and the experience of others better. And there is something about the universality that we can sort of speak in a same language. There is some code, and of course it's like Jessica already spoke to this about, we need to sort of question some of it, a lot of it, and what these systems sort of support and how they support a dominant system, and where maybe we want to break through the stories and how the stories are told and what they tell us, and how we identify with them. But there are some there is something about stories and being human which just is like, it's an intricate part of us, and that we grow up, many of us, understanding the world through stories, whether it's being read to, if we're lucky enough to be read to when we're little, or the fairy tales that we hear, and the stories then through obviously TV programs and so forth. But there is something about us being the storytellers as well. And somebody called James De Silva years ago, I just heard him say, what differentiates us as a species is that we are the storytelling species. And I think most of us love this idea that we sit in front of the fire and we either sing songs, which often have a story to them, or we're telling stories. And then we have the traditions, or we might have the family stories, as well as the more widely shared sort of stories culturally. And I think there is an idea that there's only so many stories, and that there's like 7 archetypal stories that are retold in different ways. Even in the tarot deck, for instance, which I work with, we really have the sort of the archetypal story of our journey in this human lifetime, if we want to step onto the path of coming into a deeper understanding. And so when we work with like the archetypes within the tarot deck, we also understand them within the context of a larger story, which is really helpful. And in the Fool's journey, so the Fool is the number 0 card of the major arcana in the tarot. He goes on an adventure, steps off the precipice. That's like the imagery. And then you can divide the story into sort of 3 layers, if you like, or 3 parts. And this work very much comes from Rachel Pollack and her book 78 Degrees of Wisdom, which is all about the tarot and the stories. But that we go on this worldly journey. First of all, we come into the world, we get taught by our families, our mentors, and then we go into the world. And then at some point, the story or the journey continues inwards. And this is often what happens when many of us come to the transformational practices, right? We, start to meditate, or we start practicing Qigong, or we come to yoga, and then we find something different, that actually what we thought we wanted in the world, what was going to make us happy, isn't making us happy. And then we come to another modality, which is more about like the internal journey and the inner work and our experience, perhaps in connection with the greater mystery or divinity, or however you might want to express it. So then you go through the inner journey, and this is where we have characters like the hermit who retreats and so forth, and you kind of have some of those scary cards of like death and transformation, like the dark night of the soul kind of imagery. And then the 3rd part of the journey is about the integration of like, how do we weave the inner experience, the deeper experience, the more subtle experience, with living in this world and living responsibly in this world, right? And so what is this practice of wholeness, which isn't just about our own internal wholeness, but about the wholeness and the interconnectedness of the greater whole, right? That we are doing the work not just for ourselves and for our own benefit, but ultimately we want to shift the world into a place where we are all liberated, free, and in full expression of who we are. So I think wherever, for me, in my experience, wherever I've been able to attach to a story in some way or another, it's to find a sort of some help as to where I'm at the moment. And that's also where some of the archetypes in a more sort of personal way can be helpful, because it can be like, oh, okay, actually, I want a bit of strength. Like I want that heroic vigor, or, or maybe I need that part of myself that is wild and free and doesn't care and goes and howls at the moon, and that can be liberating. Or sometimes you just need the determination and the kind of the discipline, and sort of looking at yourself as like, well, who am I playing in the story, and who do I really want to be in the story? And then when we talk about this, we can also look at, sort of in a more sort of perhaps immediate way, not with so much of an intricate story, but like the archetypal dynamics that we have. And I think one of the helpful tools is what's called commonly known as the drama triangle. If we get locked into a drama triangle where we are either the victim, or we are the perpetrator, the abuser, or we are the rescuer, the savior of a situation. And I think for many of us, that often comes in, those kind of dynamics come into play, and we can get really, really stuck in one of those roles. And in different parts of our lives, we might be in different roles in the specific thing, but it can be that can be one of the things that if we start to look at, if we start to have a perspective on it and we explore it, that we actually start to be able to break free from it. Because if we notice, oh yeah, I'm always the one there helping, or I'm always the one at fault, or somebody's always, I'm in a dynamic where it seems that I'm always creating pain and suffering for somebody else, with whatever I do, or so it can look in many different ways. And looking at just even such a simple dynamic can be very helpful. And of course, I think that also, maybe Jessica, you want to speak to it more, it's like sort of collectively something that can be really useful to look at on the whole.
Yeah, I think, everything you're saying is I am just resonating with so many different, iterations of my own journey over the last decades where, I have experienced myself within the context of a dilemma or a challenge or an opportunity, or just like feeling so brought to my knees, and where these maps and these archetypal understandings and these springboards for reflection have been so vital and helpful. And one of the other things is then like using them to the creative, imaginative, symbolic ritual ceremony, like creating these things, and in the work that we're doing here, and we'll do more in the group work, just like really being able to place yourself in, and then, fully occupy, right, whatever position you're in, exaggerate it, and then from there be able to be freed, because you're no longer resisting it, putting it away, denying it, repressing it. You're just like going right in, fully expressing it in a safe, in a caring, compassionate like space container for that. And then there's something that liberates, through that. And then you can try on and rehearse, a whole different position, and really bring that to expression. And I think what you're talking about with the victim triangle is so, it's so potent and so relevant. It's so, if you just think about it, and, those of you who are listening with us, if you just spend the next few days or week just paying attention to yourself, to the things people are telling you, to the movies that you're watching, and just notice like how dominant, talk about the waters that we swim in that become, invisible, and, like we can hardly sort of see them anymore because they're so prevalent. And what a deep impact that has, and it's that triangle is one that is, it's such a cause and a perpetuation of so much suffering, and so I think it's such an important one to really stay with and continue to, put over different situations that we're in and really unpack them through that. And, it's like, I feel like even as you're talking about, it's like, oh, the drama triangle, that's so not, it's like, because it was so big at one time. But this is the other thing, I think, just, that about looking at the fact that some of the practices that we're talking about, the maps that we're putting in this conversation and into play here, are ancient, right? And they're applicable because they're so continually relevant. But we live in a culture that is a disposable culture. It's a, here today, gone tomorrow kind of thing. And so, just like, I just want to say, it's like with that, really like picking up these tools and maintaining our practice with them and our application with them over time, that really renders like such deep and rich results towards healing and transformation. And just going, thinking about the drama triangle, it can happen within us. There can be parts of us where we're literally playing out a self-victimization, right? Where we are the punisher, we are the predator, we are the abuser of our own selves, right? And how we occupy that within the context of our own relationship with ourselves, and the different voices and the different sort of characters that live within us, the saboteur, the critic, the savior, the very young one, and then interpersonally, I mean, obviously, and I think a point that you have made so many times is that it's like we will not only continue to choose until we come into relationship with the wounding and conditioning that sort of sets up how we are expressing these dynamics within the context of our own life. We will not only be attracted to the same person. I mean, most of us who have been in a number of relationships our lives know that, like, you get out of one relationship because of particular dynamics that are happening in that relationship, and then the next relationship you get into, you find that the same dynamics are playing out, right? And why is that? Because these dynamics are locked in, and we will seek out someone who will match that dynamic, or as you've talked about before, we will put that person, even if they don't bring that in, maybe that's not naturally how they presence. But if we are running a program that's very strong in that way, we will position them in that way, and we will see them through that lens, and that will distort, the potential for what can actually be in between us, in relationship, what we can create. And in the collective, this triangle of perpetrator, victim, savior is one that, is, I think, gratefully so, but also very nascently so. I mean, you hear it a lot now, like, no one wants to be the white savior, because we have recognized, right, that is a position that has continued to perpetuate harm and to reinforce the very structures, the structure of inequality and within the US context and much of the world that is enforced through or set up as a result of racist systems, that it will very much reinforce that, because the savior comes in with their own, with their privilege and from a position of power and wanting to solve the problem or fix the thing, from their point of view, from their perspective, from their agenda. And it reinforces, then the very heart of really what's likely causing the situation that is being responded to. So I think continuing to, and I want to say here, I am approaching this with a recognition of how caught up I am, in my own conditioning, and how blind I am and will continue to be, that my own process of unlearning and learning, like, I'm in this conversation here and we're in this together because we're deeply curious and committed to figuring out, how do we really truly free ourselves from these dynamics, both personally and within the context of the collective. And we'll, there's so much more, but that's, a big question we're putting in. The question is, how do we step out of the triangle, and we'll continue to be exploring that as we go along.
Yeah, and I think part of the curiosity and the tools for that curiosity really comes from the shadow work piece of being, having a tool to, or different tools, but doing the work to turning towards, right, that which is uncomfortable, challenging, painful, but it's like the only way through to really begin to shift kind of the narrative in a way. So and the way that we've lived the stories of our conditioning, of what's happened to us. And what for me personally has been, you know, the extraordinary perhaps experience and difference in how the shadow work weaves and has helped me to simply telling the story, which I think is important. It's important for all of us to share our stories, to be heard and to be witnessed in our stories. And, you know, in traditional therapy, this is often what we do. But there is something in terms of how we practice shadow work where we go into the actual, we have the opportunity, I should say, to go into the lived experience we once had, and to almost, it's almost can be like time travel, and to through the practices also remember things that we might not remember, but because we're sort of working somatically, we're working, you know, in a more intuitive way, we can access places within ourselves where things might have happened. And as we all know, often it's the unexpected things that shape us, the unexpected seemingly small experience. I think for me, at least as a parent, that's really difficult because you try and consciously sort of create the environment where you're going to not impact your children negatively too much, right? And then the things that they come back with you a few years later that, you know, really hurt them or shaped them or made them act in, you know, that they are carrying with them in some way is often something that you never would have thought of, right? Or it was a moment, sometimes maybe even something you don't remember. And I, you know, I have memories like that myself where I felt really let down. But if you look at what actually happened in that moment, you know, the other person wasn't really, you know, it's just the experience I had. So through the practices of shadow work, we can often sort of uncover those moments as well. And then going into those moments, we have an opportunity to almost like relive the moment, reshape the moment, maybe express what needed to be expressed at that time, maybe meet the person in a different way than we were able to do because we were so young, or whatever it might be. So it's almost like we have the opportunity to kind of not rewrite the story how it was, but rewrite how it will impact us in the future, right? So that the next time that we meet a moment, that moment might not bring us all the way back to act from the place we were once in, because we've tended to that place within us. And just like in the same way, in terms of like the drama triangle and how it might live within us, we can step out of it. You know, it gives us an opportunity to begin to experience maybe stepping out of it sometimes, and not, you know, tending to the different voices, the different parts of ourselves in a different way. So that, but it's like anything, you know, it's like bringing it out of the shadow, being more conscious with it. Sometimes even just having the awareness will help us shift our behavior maybe a little bit. But it's, I think you just said this, Jessica, so beautifully. It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing commitment. This is not like, oh, you have one revelation and then everything has shifted for you. You're going to meet the same things, this core stuff of our being again and again. But the more you can shift the relationship with it, the more freedom you have in terms of how much you act out of it in a conscious or unconscious way and considered way. And maybe even sometimes it's being able to flag and go, okay, this is really up for me, so maybe I should take a moment, you know. Yeah, I just wanted to weave back onto the stories as well, because like one of I think it's interesting to think about, you know, the sort of maybe the fairy tales or the superheroes that you really resonated with, especially when you were young. And one of the stories for me that I've always loved, and I think it was more the imagery than anything, it wasn't so much the story. In fact, I can't remember, because I think actually the story isn't that great in terms of it, thinking about it now, and genderized and so on, and what it meant, you know. But Princess on the Pea was the story that I always really loved. And it wasn't, I don't remember the whole story. It was something about, you know, a real princess will feel if there's a pea under the mattress, is always so sensitive. I can't remember that bit, but I just remember this imagery of this princess who didn't know she was a princess. I think that's my recollection. And the queen in the household where she was visiting had planted this pea under the mattress to see if she would notice it. And then basically she asked for more and more mattresses because she can't get comfortable. And in the end, she has 100 mattresses and she can still feel that something's not quite right. And that was just like what stayed for me. And now as an adult, when I think of it, I'm like, oh, but that's like me, because I'm so sensitive. If something isn't quite right, you know, if I can feel that sense that somebody's, you know, not angry, upset, but something's a little bit off, like it's almost like that pea. Like I can feel the texture of the layers of energy around me if something's a little bit askew. And you know, it's sort of like a blessing and a curse at the same time. But I think it's just interesting to see, you know, what was the you know, who was the superhero that you might have really resonated with, or who you thought, you know, like, was it, I don't know, I can't think of it, you know, was it like a Robin Hood type of character, or was it like the Queen, or was it, you know, so just interesting to think about. So maybe we'll sit with that for a bit, and then maybe Jessica, after a while, you can share if anything came up for you. But if you are able to, wherever you're listening right now, to take a moment, maybe close your eyes if it's safe. If you're obviously walking or driving, keep your eyes open, but maybe you can drop in internally for a moment and just let the conversation and the things that have been shared sort of settle within you. And we'll do what we've done before, just come into the guidance of incomplete sentences. And depending on where you are, you might complete the sentence speaking out loud, even if that's possible, or just inwardly. What is most alive in me, having listened to the conversation so far, is the fairy tale or superhero I really remember loving when I was little was I think I loved this because as I listened to the conversation, I felt a little bit of discomfort around my sense is that this is because and how I can tend to this in a gentle way is by just feel your body breathing. Know that whatever's come up, you can maybe take time to sit with. If something resonates quite strongly, you might want to take some time to sit, maybe journal, maybe write it out. And also know that you can always reach out to us. We would always love to hear from you, to see how things are landing with you. So if you've had your eyes closed and you've been still, feel free to maybe stretch your body a little bit, open your eyes, and gently bring yourself back. Jessica, did anything come up that you feel like you want to share in that little guidance?
Well, the Incredible Hulk. I loved the Incredible Hulk, and I think what came up in part was just that he was able to react, to express, the intensity of the emotion that comes up. And I think when I was a little girl, I sensed that there was so much wrong in what was happening around me that I did not have the capacity or the power to express in a clear and unavoidable way, and to put things right. And I think I totally projected all my desire to be able to do that onto the Incredible Hulk. So, yeah.
I love that. I think, yeah, maybe we all need a bit more Incredible Hulk power in our lives. Thank you for being here. Next episode will be the final episode of the season. And really, this season is all about laying the foundations so that we can then move forwards more also as a collective and a community. So we would love to hear from you, and we would love your engagement. Do reach out to us in any which way that you wish to.
We appreciate your presence in this space. If you sense that friends, family, or peers would benefit from leaning in, please share.
If an episode speaks to you in a particularly meaningful way or raises questions that you would like to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can connect with us here on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram at leaning_in_.
Leaning In is produced by Tanya Mikwitz and Jessica Lesty. The beautiful music you hear here is provided by Masood Ali Khan. Our sound engineer is Marley Mikwitz Montgomery.